Imagine spending your entire life chasing success, believing that every promotion, every award, every $1 million would one day buy you happiness. Now imagine losing the one thing money has never been able to purchase: someone who truly cares. Rain crashes against the tall glass windows of a magnificent mansion. Inside, a dining table stretches across the room, decorated with crystal glasses, expensive wine, and enough food for dozens of guests. A magnificent three-tier birthday cake glows beneath the chandelier. Every candle is lit, every chair is empty. The clock slowly ticks, 7:00 p.m., no footsteps, no laughter, no conversations, only silence. The camera slowly pushes toward the end of the table. There sits William Harrison, a 52-year-old billionaire CEO, once the most feared businessman in America, now confined to a wheelchair after a devastating accident. His expensive tailored suit cannot hide the loneliness in his eyes. His trembling hands rest on the wheels of the chair as he stares at the front door, waiting, believing, hoping someone will come. Anyone. The door never opens. His phone remains silent. No calls, no messages, no family, no friends, not even the executives who once fought for 5 minutes of his attention. William forces a weak smile, looks at the untouched birthday cake, and quietly whispers to himself, "So this is what my life's worth." A tear escapes down his cheek, not because he's paralyzed, but because for the first time in his life, he realizes he is completely alone. He spent 30 years building a billion-dollar empire. Thousands of employees admired his brilliance. Politicians wanted his endorsement. Celebrities begged to stand beside him for photographs. But the day he needed just one person, no one came. A long silence, then, ding-dong. Single knock echoes through the empty mansion. William slowly lifts his head. Hope flickers in his eyes. He has no idea that the person standing behind that door isn't another billionaire or a famous friend, but a struggling single father carrying a little girl with a handmade birthday card. And before this night is over, both of their lives will change forever. They say success has a price. For William Harrison, that price was everything, long before the wheelchair, long before the silence. Long before an empty mansion became the loudest place on earth, there was a young man with nothing but impossible dreams. William Harrison wasn't born into wealth. He grew up in a small Ohio neighborhood where every dollar mattered. His father worked double shifts at a steel factory. His mother cleaned hotel rooms just to keep food on the table. As a little boy, William made himself one promise: one day, I'll become so successful that I'll never have to worry about money again. It was a promise born from love, but over the years, it slowly became an obsession. While other children spent weekends with friends, William spent his buried in books, teaching himself computers and business. By the time he graduated college, he had already founded a small software company from the cramped garage of a rented apartment. People laughed at him, banks rejected him, investors told him he was wasting his life, but William refused to quit. Years of sleepless nights, missed meals, and endless sacrifices eventually turned that tiny startup into Harrison Technologies, one of the largest technology companies in America. At just 52 years old, William was worth billions. Business magazines called him a visionary. Television networks competed for exclusive interviews. World leaders invited him to private dinners. His calendar was booked months in advance. To the outside world, he was the definition of success. But success has a way of hiding the things that truly matter. Every promotion came at the cost of another missed birthday. Every business trip meant another canceled dinner. Every record-breaking deal pushed someone he loved a little farther away. His marriage slowly fell apart. His wife grew tired of competing with conference calls and board meetings. When she finally packed her bags and left, William didn't chase after her. Instead, he walked into another meeting. He convinced himself there would always be time later. Later to apologize, later to visit his parents, later to make new friends, later to enjoy life. But later never came. The people around him didn't stay because they loved him. They stayed because they needed something from him: his money, his influence, his signature, his approval. The moment business ended, so did the relationships. Then, everything changed. 18 months ago, while flying home from a corporate conference, William's private helicopter was caught in a violent storm. Within seconds, the aircraft lost control. The crash made headlines across the country. Against all odds, William survived, but the injuries to his spine changed his life forever. The man who once walked confidently into boardrooms now needed help just to get out of bed. The CEO who controlled billion-dollar negotiations would no longer button his own shirt without assistance. For months, hospitals replaced luxury hotels. Physical therapists replaced business consultants. The endless applause of shareholders was replaced by the quiet hum of medical machines. And something else changed too. The phone that never stopped ringing became painfully silent. Business partners stopped calling. Executives became too busy. Acquaintances disappeared. One by one, the people William believed were his friends quietly drifted away. It wasn't the accident that broke his heart. It was discovering that the empire he spent 30 years building had never protected him from loneliness. Now every morning he sat beside the enormous windows of his mansion, watching the world continue without him. For the first time in his life, William Harrison wasn't afraid of losing his fortune. He was afraid that if he disappeared tomorrow, no one would even notice. A week before William Harrison's 53rd birthday, his personal assistant, Sarah Mitchell, stood outside his office with a notebook in her hands. She had worked beside William for nearly 15 years. She had seen the empire grow, she had seen billion-dollar deals signed, and she had never seen him look as lonely as he did now. Quietly, she asked, Mr. Harrison, would you mind if we planned something special this year? William forced a small smile. You really think anyone would come? Sarah answered with confidence she didn't truly feel. Of course they will. After all, this was William Harrison, the founder of Harrison Technologies, a man whose company employed thousands. Surely one birthday celebration wouldn't be difficult to fill. Over the next few days, Sarah personally sent more than 200 invitations. Board members, senior executives, longtime business partners, investors, former colleagues, even people William had mentored over the years. At first, the replies seemed promising. I'll check my schedule. Looking forward to it. I'll try my best, but as the days passed, the excuses began arriving. I'm out of the country. I have another commitment. Family emergency, business trip. Let's celebrate next year. One after another, every name disappeared from the guest list. Even members of his own board, people who had once waited hours outside his office for a 5-minute meeting, declined without a second thought. Sarah refreshed her email over and over, hoping at least one person would change their mind. No one did. Still, she refused to tell William. Instead, she decorated the mansion exactly as planned. Fresh flowers lined the entrance. Soft music filled the dining room. Crystal glasses sparkled beneath the chandeliers. A magnificent 3-tier birthday cake stood proudly in the center of a table prepared for dozens of guests. Everything looked perfect, except for one thing: the chairs remained empty. 7 o'clock. William adjusted the sleeves of his navy blue suit and glanced toward the front door. Traffic, he whispered, trying to convince himself. 7:15, the candles on the cake continued to burn. 7:30, the silence became impossible to ignore. Sarah looked down at her phone one last time. Nothing, not a single message saying, I'm almost there. Not one. Meanwhile, across social media, the internet celebrated him. Happy birthday to the legendary William Harrison. An inspiration to entrepreneurs everywhere. Wishing our visionary CEO many more successful years. Thousands of likes, hundreds of comments, dozens of polished tribute videos, but behind the glowing screens, not one of those people knocked on his front door. William stared at the empty seats arranged around the table, seats that had been reserved for people he once believed were friends. Finally, he slowly wheeled himself toward the birthday cake. His hands trembled as he leaned forward. He closed his eyes, made one silent wish, and gently blew out the candles himself. Smoke curled into the air. The room grew darker. A single tear escaped down his cheek. His voice barely rose above a whisper. Was I really that easy to forget? Sarah turned away, unable to hide her own tears. At that exact moment, just as the silence became unbearable, ding, dong. The sound of the front door echoed through the mansion. William looked up. Sarah froze. Neither of them expected that the person standing outside wasn't a billionaire, wasn't a politician, wasn't even an old friend. It was a struggling single father, holding the hand of a little girl carrying a homemade birthday card. The loud chime of the doorbell echoed through the silent mansion. Ding, dong. William slowly lifted his head. For a brief moment, hope returned to his eyes. He looked towards Sarah. She looked back at him with the same silent question. Could someone actually have come? Outside, rain continued to pour, beating against the marble steps leading to the front entrance. Sarah hurried to the door. In her mind, there was only one explanation. Probably another gift delivery, she thought. She reached for the brass handle, took a deep breath, and slowly opened the door. Standing there wasn't another billionaire, not a famous investor, not a politician, not one of the executives who had promised to stop by. Instead, a man in a faded blue jacket stood quietly beneath a worn umbrella, his shoes soaked from walking through the rain. He looked tired, not the kind of tired that comes from missing a night's sleep, but the kind that comes from carrying life's burdens for years without complaining. Beside him stood a little girl with bright brown eyes and neatly braided hair. She couldn't have been older than 8. She held a small handmade birthday card tightly against her chest, careful not to let the rain ruin it. The edges were slightly bent. Tiny glitter stars decorated the front. Written in colorful crayons were the words, "Happy birthday, Mr. Harrison." Sarah looked at them, confused. "I'm sorry," she said politely. "Are you here for the birthday party?" The man nodded nervously. "Yes, ma'am. My name is Daniel Brooks. I don't have an invitation, but I was hoping Mr. Harrison might spare me just 5 minutes." Sarah hesitated. She had spent the entire evening watching 200 invited guests choose not to come. And now, the only person standing at the door was someone no one recognized. Before she could answer, William's voice called from the dining room. "Sarah, who's there?" She glanced back, then quietly stepped aside. "Someone who says he wants to meet you." Daniel gently took his daughter's hand. Together, they walked into the enormous mansion. Emma's eyes grew wide as she admired the sparkling chandeliers, the grand staircase, and the towering birthday cake that still sat untouched in the center of the room. She whispered to her father, "Daddy, this house is so beautiful." Daniel smiled softly. "It is, but remember what I told you. The people inside a house matter more than the house itself." William watched them approach, his expression filled with confusion. The stranger certainly didn't look like someone from his world. No expensive watch, no tailored suit, no security detail, just a humble father, and a little girl holding a card made with love instead of money. William studied Daniel's face carefully. He searched his memory, nothing. Finally he spoke. "I'm sorry." His voice was calm but puzzled. "I don't believe we've ever met." Daniel smiled warmly. "I know." William frowned. "You know." Daniel nodded. "You don't know me. And honestly, I never expected you would." He paused for a moment, glancing at Emma before looking back at William. But 10 years ago, you changed my life." The room fell completely silent. Sarah stopped where she was standing. William's eyebrows narrowed. "I did." Daniel slowly stepped closer. "There isn't a single day that my daughter and I don't thank God for what happened that winter." William searched his face again, still nothing. "I'm afraid you've mistaken me for someone else." Daniel gently shook his head. "No, sir. I spent years thinking I would never have the chance to thank the man who saved my family. I only discovered your name a few weeks ago." He looked directly into William's eyes. "And when I heard today was your birthday, I knew I couldn't stay home." Emma walked forward shyly, clutching the handmade card with both hands. She smiled the way only a child can, pure, honest, without expecting anything in return. She stretched out her little hands toward William. "This is for you, Mr. Harrison." William accepted the card with trembling fingers. For the first time that evening, someone had given him something that couldn't be bought. As he stared at the colorful crayon drawings on the front, he had no idea that the story hidden behind this tiny card was about to reveal a chapter of his own life he had completely forgot. And before this conversation was over, the billionaire who believed he had been abandoned by the world would discover that one small act of kindness had been quietly changing lives for an entire decade. William stared at Daniel in silence. His fingers still rested on the handmade birthday card. His mind searched desperately for a memory, but there was nothing. Finally he looked up. "I'm sorry, I wish I could remember." Daniel smiled, not with disappointment, but with gratitude. "You wouldn't remember, Mr. Harrison. Because for you, it was just another signature. For me, it was the reason my daughter and I survived." The room fell silent. Rain continued tapping softly against the mansion windows as Daniel took a slow breath. Then, his story carried everyone 10 years into the past. It was the coldest winter Daniel Brooks could remember, the kind of winter that made sleeping outside a death sentence. Back then, Daniel wasn't a school bus driver. He worked nights as a janitor at Harrison Technologies. Every evening after the office lights went out and the executives drove home in luxury cars, Daniel stayed behind. He cleaned conference rooms, emptied trash bins, mopped marble floors that reflected the success of people whose names appeared on magazine covers. Few people knew his name, even fewer noticed he existed. Just 3 months earlier, Daniel's entire world had fallen apart. His wife Grace had lost her courageous battle with cancer. In a matter of weeks, he became both mother and father to their tiny daughter Emma. She was only 8 months old. Every night after finishing work, Daniel drove to a small supermarket parking lot, not to shop, but because it was the safest place he could find to sleep. His old sedan had become their home. A thin blanket covered the back seat where little Emma slept peacefully, unaware that they no longer had a place to call home. Daniel often skipped meals so he could buy baby formula instead. Some nights he drank nothing but water. Other nights, he pretended he wasn't hungry at all. Then came the letter that nearly destroyed him. If he couldn't provide a stable home within 30 days, Child Protective Services would begin reviewing Emma's living conditions. Daniel still remembered holding that letter with trembling hands. He wasn't afraid of being poor. He was terrified of losing the only family he had left. Every night after Emma fell asleep, he whispered the same prayer. "God, I don't need a miracle, I just need one chance." One freezing evening, long after most employees had gone home, William Harrison was leaving the office after another 16-hour workday. As his car pulled toward the exit, he noticed an old sedan parked alone beneath a broken streetlight. Something caught his attention. The windows were fogged from the inside. Curious, he asked his driver to stop. From a distance, William saw a young father asleep in the driver's seat, curled up in the back. A tiny baby rested beneath a worn pink blanket. He never woke them, he never knocked on the window, he never asked for recognition. The next morning, William quietly called the human resources director into his office. "There's an employee who needs help," he said. "Don't tell him where it came from, just make sure he gets it." That afternoon, an anonymous emergency employee grant was approved. Enough money to cover several months of rent, enough to buy groceries, enough to furnish a modest apartment, enough to give a grieving father one more chance. When Daniel received the news, he dropped to his knees in disbelief. He searched for the name of the person who had saved his family. There wasn't one. Only the words, "approved through the Harrison Technologies Employee Emergency Relief Fund." Years passed. Daniel rebuilt his life. He found a better job. Emma grew into a bright, kind-hearted little girl, and although he never stopped thanking God for the stranger who had helped him, he never discovered who that stranger was until, a few weeks ago, while requesting old employment records for a community scholarship application. The company archives accidentally included a copy of the original approval form. For the first time, Daniel saw the signature at the bottom of the page, William Harrison. He looked up at the man sitting quietly in the wheelchair. Tears filled Daniel's eyes. "You probably signed hundreds of documents that day. You forgot mine, but my daughter and I," his voice cracked, "we spent the last 10 years praying for the man whose name was written at the bottom of that page." William lowered his head. His eyes filled with tears. In all his years of chasing billion-dollar deals, he had forgotten one simple signature, but that single act of kindness had become the foundation of another family's entire future. And for the first time since his accident, William realized something extraordinary. Perhaps the greatest legacy he had ever created wasn't the company that made him rich. It was the life he had quietly saved without ever expecting to be thanked. For a long moment, no one spoke. The mansion that had felt so cold and empty only minutes earlier, now felt heavy with emotion. William Harrison sat motionless in his wheelchair staring at the old document Daniel had carefully placed before him. His hands trembled, not because of his injury, but because of something he hadn't felt in years. He felt seen. He had spent decades believing that success was measured by profits, awards, and headlines, yet the one decision that truly mattered was one he had completely forgot. Before William could find the words to speak, a tiny voice gently broke the silence. "Mr. Harrison," it was Emma. She stood quietly beside him, clutching the handmade birthday card she had protected from the rain. She looked up at him with the innocent smile only a child could give. "I made this for you." William smiled through tears. "For me?" Emma nodded. "Yes, my daddy said birthdays aren't about expensive presents. They're about reminding people they're loved." She carefully placed the colorful card into William's trembling hands. It wasn't wrapped in shiny paper. It wasn't decorated with gold ribbon. The edges were slightly uneven. There were tiny fingerprints in the dried glitter. Every word had been written slowly in bright crayons. It was imperfect, and somehow, it was the most beautiful gift William had ever received. He slowly opened it. Inside, written in careful, childlike handwriting, were the words, "Happy birthday, Mr. Harrison. My daddy says heroes don't always wear capes. Sometimes they sign papers." William read the words once, then again, his vision blurred. A tear landed softly on the page, smudging a tiny crayon heart Emma had drawn beside her name. For years, newspapers had called him a genius. Television hosts had called him a billionaire. Business magazines had called him one of the most powerful men in America. But no title had ever touched his heart the way one little girl's words did, to Emma. He wasn't a billionaire, he wasn't a CEO, he was simply a hero. William lowered the card to his lap and covered his face with both hands. The tears he had held back for years finally came, not quiet tears, but the deep, uncontrollable tears of a man realizing that his life had mattered in ways he had never stopped long enough to notice. Sarah quietly wiped her own eyes. Even Daniel struggled to hold back his emotions. After a few moments, Daniel reached into the worn leather backpack resting beside his chair. "I have one more gift for you," he said softly. "It isn't expensive, but I think it belongs with you." He placed a small, neatly wrapped box on the dining table. William looked at it curiously. His fingers carefully untied the ribbon. Inside was an old wooden picture frame. At first, William didn't understand what he was looking at. Then he looked closer. His breath caught. The photograph showed dozens of smiling faces standing together outside a community center. Young and old, men and women, parents holding children, veterans, teachers, nurses, mechanics, office workers. Some were in wheelchairs, some held bobbies in their arms, others proudly wore graduation gowns or work uniforms. Every face carried the same expression, hope. Daniel smiled. "Do you recognize any of them?" William slowly shook his head. "No, I don't." "You wouldn't," Daniel replied. "But every one of them recognizes you." He pointed to different faces in the photograph. "The woman in the front row, your employee scholarship paid for her nursing degree. The elderly man beside her, you quietly covered his wife's cancer treatment. The young couple holding twins, they received emergency housing assistance after losing everything in a fire. The veteran, you helped him start a small business after he returned home." Daniel looked directly into William's eyes. "They all wanted to come today. They all wanted you to know that one act of kindness changed the direction of their lives." William's hands trembled as he turned the frame over. On the back, written in elegant handwriting, were just 7 simple words. "You thought nobody remembered. You were wrong." William stared at the message. The room disappeared around him. For weeks, he had believed the world had forgotten his name, but in that single moment, he realized something extraordinary. The people he had been waiting for were never the ones who truly mattered. The lives he had quietly touched had been carrying his kindness with them all along, and before the night was over, he was about to discover that this photograph was only the beginning of a reunion he never imagined possible. There is an old saying, "A single act of kindness can echo for a lifetime." William Harrison was about to discover just how true those words were. As the room fell silent, Daniel reached for his phone. He looked at William with a gentle smile. "There's something I did before I came here." William looked up. "What was that?" Daniel unlocked his phone and showed him the screen. Just 30 minutes earlier, while standing outside the mansion in the pouring rain, he had posted a simple photograph. It wasn't a picture of the mansion. It wasn't a picture of the birthday cake. It wasn't even a picture of the billionaire. It was a photo of Emma holding her handmade birthday card. Beneath it, Daniel had written, "10 years ago, a man I'll probably never be able to repay saved my daughter and me without asking for recognition. Today is his birthday, and I just found out he's spending it alone. If Mr. William Harrison ever changed your life, maybe today is the day we remind him that kindness is never forgot." Daniel smiled. "I didn't expect anyone to see it, but people did." At first, nothing happened. Then a notification appeared, another, then another. Hundreds, thousands, former employees began sharing Daniel's story. People tagged old friends, old coworkers called one another. Messages spread across the country faster than anyone imagined. Back at the mansion, the silence was interrupted once again. Ding, dong. William looked toward the front door, then another knock, and another. Sarah hurried to answer. Standing outside was a woman in a nurse's uniform, still wearing her hospital identification badge. She held a small bouquet of white lilies, her eyes filled with tears as she smiled. "I hope I'm not too late." She stepped inside and walked straight toward William. "You probably don't remember me," she said, "but 15 years ago your employee scholarship paid for my nursing school after my father died. If it weren't for that opportunity, I would never have become the nurse who now spends every day saving lives. Before William could respond, another knock echoed through the mansion. A firefighter entered carrying his helmet beneath one arm. He shook William's hand with both of his. When my family's home burned down, your emergency relief fund gave us a place to stay. I've wanted to thank you ever since. Then came another visitor, an engineer. I was the first person in my family to graduate from college because of your scholarship. Then another, a teacher. You paid for the books I couldn't afford. Another, a military veteran. You helped me rebuild my life when I came home with nothing. Another and another. The front door never seemed to stop opening. Each person carried a different story, a different memory, a different life forever changed, yet every story ended the same way. Someone helped me. Without asking for anything in return. Within an hour, the mansion that had echoed with painful silence was alive. The empty dining room filled with people who laughed together. Children ran through the hallways, old coworkers embraced, conversations replaced loneliness. The untouched birthday cake was finally surrounded by smiling faces. For the first time in years, the mansion felt less like a museum of success and more like a home. William looked around the room, overwhelmed. These weren't people who had come because he was a billionaire. They weren't there because of his company or his influence or his wealth. They came because somewhere in their darkest moments, one quiet decision, one forgotten signature, one unseen act of compassion, had given them hope when they had none. As tears streamed down William's face, he whispered words he never thought he would say. I spent my whole life believing I built a company. He looked around the room filled with grateful faces. But all this time, I was building a family, and in that moment, the man who thought no one remembered him realized that genuine kindness never disappears. It simply waits until the day it finds its way back home. Sometimes, life waits until you've lost everything you thought mattered, before showing you what truly does. As the voices inside the mansion slowly faded into warm conversations and heartfelt laughter, William Harrison sat quietly in his wheelchair. His eyes wandered around the room. Just a few hours earlier, these same chairs had been painfully empty. The silence had been so loud it almost convinced him that his life had meant nothing. Now, every chair was occupied, not by billionaires, not by celebrities, not by politicians, but by ordinary people whose lives had been forever changed by extraordinary kindness. William closed his eyes. For the first time since the accident, he didn't feel broken. His body was still paralyzed. His legs still couldn't carry him, but his spirit had stood up for the very first time. At that moment, he finally understood a truth that had taken him 52 years to learn. His greatest achievement had never been Harrison Technologies. It wasn't the skyscrapers that bore his company's name. It wasn't the billions in his bank account. It wasn't the awards displayed in his office. His greatest achievement was every life that continued because someone had believed there was still hope. Every child who kept their home, every family that stayed together, every dream that refused to die because of one forgotten signature. William smiled through tears. For decades, he thought he had been building an empire. In reality, he had been building something far greater, a legacy of compassion. Months later, William announced a decision that stunned the business world. He donated a large portion of his personal fortune to establish the Harrison Hope Foundation, an organization dedicated to helping struggling single parents, disabled workers, widows, widowers, and families facing unexpected hardship. Its mission was simple: no one should have to face life's hardest moments alone. When reporters asked William why he created the foundation, he smiled and gave a simple answer. Because someone reminded me that kindness is the only investment that never loses its value. But William had one more surprise. When it came time to appoint the foundation's first executive director, he didn't choose a famous businessman. He didn't choose one of his former executives. He chose Daniel Brooks, the humble single father who had arrived at his darkest moment carrying nothing more than gratitude and a little girl with a handmade birthday card. Daniel accepted the role with tears in his eyes. Every application he approved reminded him of the miracle that had once rescued his own family. Every family the foundation helped became another chapter in William's living legacy. 1 year later, the mansion looked completely different. The long dining table was once again covered with food. Another birthday cake stood proudly in the center. But this time, before the candles were even lit, the house was already filled with laughter. Children chased each other through the hallways. Former employees shared old memories. Families embraced one another. No seat was empty. No silence remained. As everyone gathered to sing happy birthday, William looked around the room overwhelmed with gratitude. Then, Emma walked toward him. She was a year older now, more confident, still holding another handmade birthday card. She wrapped her arms gently around William's shoulders, leaned close to his ear, and whispered with a smile that melted every heart in the room, "Happy birthday, Grandpa." William closed his eyes. A tear rolled slowly down his face, not from pain, not from regret, but from a happiness he had searched for his entire life and found only after he stopped searching for success and started embracing love. The mansion that once echoed with unbearable loneliness now overflowed with laughter, hope, and family. The screen slowly faded to black. Success isn't measured by the people who celebrate your victories. It's measured by the people who remember your kindness when you have nothing left to offer. Because the richest people in the world aren't those who die with the most money. They're the ones who leave behind the most love. If this story touched your heart, leave a red in the comments and tell us, what is one act of kindness you'll never forget? Your story could inspire someone who desperately needs hope today. And if you believe kindness always finds its way back, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video with someone who needs a reminder that even the smallest act of compassion can change a life forever.